All right. Hi, everybody. This is Chris McCabe of e-commerce Chris. I'm with Paul Rafelson, tax attorney extraordinaire, tax expert, who's here to talk, and Leah McHugh is also with me as well. She read the Wayfair Supreme Court decision many times today, I think, and she's here to talk about that with Paul and me. Paul's got a lot to say. Can you break down the Wayfair Supreme Court South Dakota decision? And sorry for throwing that all out at once.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's all right. Well,
Break it down for us.
break it down. Okay, first and foremost, the Wayfair lost, I guess is the way to put it. The Supreme Court ruled that the physical presence rule, the rule that basically said that in order for a business to be taxable in the state, either subject to tax or required to collect a tax, requires a physical presence in the state. The court pretty much just disregarded that rule completely. They just shut it down. They hate the rule. It's been a big pain in the states, the ability to raise revenue. The courts recognize that, so they thought it was a terrible rule, especially because it was affirmed in 1992 and nobody ever saw what was coming, and so now they don't like it, so they overturned it. But it was very limited to that. I think it was very narrow. They just got rid of the physical presence rule as a factor of determining nexus and what's appropriate. So I don't think it's a big loss, but that's effectively what happened. The court did not get into things like who was a retailer, because that's not really what the court's meant to do, nor did they get into the issue of whether states requiring sellers to go into income tax collection and sales tax, or paying income tax, collecting sales tax, whether that's constitutional or whether that burdens too much to put on a small business. They actually invited that argument. They invited that case. If that does become an issue, they certainly saw that as something that could be brought before a court again, in the future as a result of the ruling. But they didn't actually say that, oh, well, therefore, this South Dakota rule is such, and therefore it's not a burden on anyone, and therefore anyone who has this criteria must collect sales tax. It's a little
right, and I think that's something that people are maybe confused about. A lot of people have referred to this as the end of this fight, or that all online sellers are now going to have to collect and pay sales tax in every state. And that's really not what their ruling said.
No.
Not even close. Not even close. Really, I mean, this hasn't changed.
I have a question. So physical presence is now less important. Is that what that meant?
Yeah, I mean, for many FBA merchants, was it ever important? I mean, FBA merchants are deemed to have physical presence by the states already. So all those people were being chased down by California before this court case. I mean, this didn't really change much to your negative. It's what it's done is it's opened up the avenue for, it's helped us sort of refine the legal challenge that we want to bring. But, that comes down to another issue of how do you do that? Because, I can sit here and be optimistic all day and tell you all these great things that, this court does, this may allow us to do this or that, the other. But at the end of the day, if we don't take action, and we don't, assert our constitutional rights, and what's the point? That's how we get screwed here. Not because of what the court said, it's because we don't take action.
So it's like a business transaction that might involve Amazon, that might involve a buyer in a certain state, that draws you in as the party responsible for collecting sales tax.
Well, again, I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, that's the question of whether or not, one, is that even fair? Is that a fair burden for somebody whose only connection to the state is through Amazon selling the products to that state, even if it's their inventory, if that's what they would call it, even though their stuff is in a warehouse? That's the question, is that really appropriate? Is $100,000 of sales in the state via Amazon an appropriate threshold for somebody who doesn't really direct their activity towards any one state? You're not Wayfair. This case was very tailored towards, the court's disdain for a multi-billion-dollar company trying to, leverage a sales tax advantage with the physical presence rule. I think they found that to be offensive. But, that's not to say that if you're being, put in a situation where you're a small merchant, but you have high velocity sales into a state, that you should therefore be subject to their sales tax and then income tax requirements in that state. I think that's a big stretch.
Okay.
Gotcha. But I mean, this may also be, we don't know yet, but this may actually be a good thing for FBA sellers potentially if we take physical presence out of the equation and then ask if they have a meaningful presence in that state does FBA inventory even count as a meaningful presence at this point? I mean, this hasn't been decided yet, but it opens up that discussion.
Right. That's exactly right. And that's a question I actually sort of posted this sort of one sentence agree or disagree question because I genuinely was curious to see what my peers thought on this issue about whether do you view this case as the removal of physical presence as a barrier to tax? So in other words, physical presence basically preventing the states from taxing, and also removing the concept that physical presence is an instantaneous gotcha, right? The moment you have a toe in the water in that state, you're subject to their tax laws, and you have to do everything just as if you were, Walmart, just because you have some, like you said, lack of meaningful presence, but presence nonetheless. I guarantee you the states are going to take the position that it's the former, not the latter, that any physical presence still stands as substantial enough to meet the requirements that are set out in complete auto and whatnot. But I agree with you. I think the whole point of the article, the whole point of the case is just say physical presence just isn't a factor. Let's just remove it from the equation entirely.
Right. And it's funny because I was reading this on a plane, so I didn't see your comments until after I had come to much the same conclusion that this takes physical presence out of the equation, and it doesn't automatically imply that you now have to pay sales tax. It means that the idea of nexus is now needing to be redefined.
Right. And I think that
no state's going to copy the South Dakota model for it.
Yeah, I mean, they might go more aggressive. I mean, the court seemed to, obviously the court didn't, they remanded the case to the lower courts to ultimately decide if that's their right standard, but they certainly seem to have no problem with it. Again, as applied to $1 billion company, and then pontificated the possibility that there could be a small company that might not meet that, where that might not be problematic. I mean, they just don't really know.
Yeah.
So they're not really going to go there. They kind of think in their mind that if you have $100,000 of sales in the state, you must have some substantial presence in that state. But they really don't know. So the door's open. But I think, Leah, to your point, I mean, that's what the court basically did was what they were trying to avoid in '92, which was turn nexus back into sort of a gray. I think physical presence was black and white. That was the point, called a bright line test. They just didn't want the states to just kind of be like having this constant nexus litigation happening where nobody really is clear what nexus is or isn't. And then they got scared way back when. And now that they're seeing it this way, they're thinking, okay, well, let's just pull physical presence out, turn it back to gray. And, maybe this also inspires Congress to take action, which may or may not be a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's my next question. Is the next, is it going to be legislation or litigation? What's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, on behalf of online merchants, it needs to be, where I step into that sort of role where I volunteer my time as the executive director of the Online Merchants Guild. Yeah, I mean, I think that our members need to get together, more people need to join so that we can take, litigation action so that being chased down by California right now for, a ton of back taxes and penalties and interest, your rights are still there. They're still, in this case, does not do anything to say that you don't have rights to assert as far as, whether the state of California can impose a 10-year back tax burden on you involving sales tax and income tax and all that stuff.
Right.
Whether that's appropriate since your only connection to the state was via, Amazon putting inventory there that you ship to them. That question still is very much unknown, and we have to litigate. And I think the answer is it's totally burdensome. It's insane. It's not even due process level nexus. But how do you do that? You got to get people have to join Online Merchants Guild. We have to raise the money. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars to litigate these cases. It doesn't go to me. It goes to the lawyers. That we have to hire the litigators to bring this type of a case. But we can do it. We can get a quick resolution. As far as Congress, I mean, I think court definitely both sides of this case wanted congressional intervention. I think the thought was after the oral arguments that they probably were just going to continue to stare decisis, keep the rule as it was, because they didn't seem like too keen on what the states were saying and more focused on the small business, and then just kind of reemphasize the need for Congress to get involved. Well, this was the opposite. They actually, everything they talked about at oral argument about small business, they seemed to just throw that out of the way and say that's for another case, not this one. And by sort of creating the chaos that they did by removing physical presence, that's also going to motivate Congress to kind of take action now, because they got to kind of figure, we got to make it.
Right. It's interesting from our perspective. We just came from this FBA seller conference in New Orleans, Amazon Boost. Right on the heels of that, I mean, what do FBA sellers have to look at in terms of using taking a different business strategy? I mean, what is their next move in terms of use of FBA, and what's smart versus what's not so smart?
Yeah, I mean, the next move in terms of FBA is to join the Online Merchants Guild, tell your friends to join the Online Merchant Guild, tell your friends to tell their friends, tell your gurus and thought leaders, your podcasters, everyone to get involved, because the reality is, if you want to continue to sell FBA, we have to assert those rights. Otherwise, the states are just going to continue to come after you and say that you have physical presence in every state, even though we don't even think that matters, but states will still say it does.
Something that I found interesting, particularly for sellers who are currently having states going after them for back taxes, was that this ruling, they were very clear on the fact that South Dakota weren't going after retroactive liability.
Right.
That retroactive liability could actually have double tax burden implications.
Yeah. You know, and the double tax question is interesting. I don't know how you would ever, you know, I think if it ever came down to proving it, you know, the state could say, well, this is how much use tax we collected, and this is how much, you know, relative to how much sales tax we didn't collect. But it's an interesting point that was brought up. But I think your point about retroactivity is important, because for those who aren't FBA sellers who might be now finding themselves in the situation, at least for your situation, there should be no amnesty. There should be none of that. Not that, you know, if the states are going to pressure you into tax, it should be as of today. It shouldn't be as of 5 years ago.
Right.
You that are FBA sellers, the states will say, well, you know, we're not doing this retroactive. You had a physical presence at a time when physical presence was the law. So this isn't retroactive. So unfortunately, I don't see the retroactivity as being a huge relief for the FBA sellers. I do have a serious detrimental reliance problem here, especially when states are going after FBA merchants for taxes all the way back to 2010, even though Amazon only started collecting in California in late 2012. So it's odd to me that an FBA seller on Amazon would be liable for more years of back tax than Amazon ever was. It's just such a ridiculous situation.
Well, those are the kinds of oddities and questions you want to see these other gurus and influencers, whatever they want to call themselves, talking about in their groups. So I guess you've encountered some resistance, or what seems to be the problem in terms of getting together, you know, more of a unified voice?
I don't know, Chris. I mean, you've been a huge supporter, obviously, of this issue, of the group, of everything, and you kind of get it that this is an existential crisis. That this isn't, you know, Online Merchants Guild doesn't exist. We're not competing with people who provide thought leadership and guidance on how to be successful on Amazon. That's not what we do. We're not here to teach your members how to be success. I don't know how to teach your members how to be success. But what we want to do is just kind of keep that opportunity open, that window of opportunity for everyone to succeed, so everyone has a chance. And, you know, we need the gurus to understand that we're looking out for them, that, you know, they're going to be as relevant as a MySpace guru in a matter of a year if they don't take action. I mean, that's the reality, because most of the people that they serve right now aren't going to be able to afford to sell on Amazon if this comes the way, if the sales tax, the income tax. So they need to get involved. They need to take action, stop and help promote our cause.
Well, this has an even
awareness.
bigger implication than just Amazon sellers. I mean, we're talking software as a service people. We're talking people that sell their own personal services online. There was a moment actually earlier today where I just kind of sat for a moment and realized how many of my friends who aren't Amazon sellers, who just work online or are freelancers, this affects them too. This affects anybody that sells anything to any of the states.
Everybody, anybody, any country. I mean, I do these webinars for people, sometimes for gurus who are in New Zealand, you know, England. I mean, it's anyone, anywhere. If you're doing business in the United States from anywhere, you're potentially at risk, and this is a huge issue, and one that's going to require further clarity. And it's not a settled issue. This does not go register for sales tax in every state. That's not a good idea. There's a lot of bad things that are, you know, that a lot of the sales tax service providers don't tell you about, especially, like I said, income tax costs are substantially more than sales tax costs. We have to file, you know, registration fees or annual fees for your entity. You've got to file, you know, an entity return for your LLC or whatever entity structure you're using, and then you got to file a personal income tax return and do that in every state, and sort of divvy up your profits per state. I mean, the tax isn't going to be that much, to be honest with you. It's probably going to, and you probably get an offset from your taxes that you pay to the state on income. But the cost of compliance, I mean, it's probably thousands of dollars a state. So every time Amazon opens up another factory or just another warehouse in another state, you're now just up your annual cost of accounting and fees, you know, another couple of thousand. You might as well just hire a full-time tax person, which for most of the sellers I speak to, that's an impossible ask.
Right.
And I think that's the most important thing for people to realize right now is that this doesn't mean you have to go and register with every state right now. Don't do that. There's a lot of panic going on right now, whether it's in the press or just people talking about this and commenting on it, a lot of whom probably haven't read the full decision.
Right.
But this doesn't mean you have to now go and register in every single state or all 10,000 tax jurisdictions.
Right.
Yeah, definitely not a good idea.
Please don't do that.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, it's so scary. Some people are so scared, and to some extent, rightfully so, because this is a big mess. But, people are asking me, am I going to lose my house, and trying to figure out how they can, hide their money from the government, and sort of leads me to referring them to, I wouldn't suggest that you hide your money from the government, but there are, lawyers who specialize in asset protection that, I've had to connect with and connect sellers with because they're concerned, and rightfully so. And it's a good idea for other reasons outside of tax to just kind of good opportunity to check up your structure and make sure your structure is current and appropriate, not the structure you set up when you were 18 years old on LegalZoom, because that's probably not important for you anymore.
So I think the most important thing, or the most important question I have is, what's the next step? Like, what should FBA sellers do right now?
Other than join the guild, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I wouldn't go, if somebody sends you a questionnaire, I wouldn't just go answering it. I would, call a lawyer, one that actually understands the Commerce Clause and the Due Process Clause and the law, and obviously I'm one of them. But I wouldn't necessarily go running to a tax service provider at that point, because they do tend to lead you down the tax compliance path, which I said is a trap. So if you're getting contacted by a state, you have to certainly understand what they're doing and then take the appropriate action to protect yourself. Make sure you understand what's required of you when that happens. But big picture, I mean, like I tell every person who's ever engaged me, and even people I represent at administrative levels in the states right now, you can't afford, no one seller can afford to litigate this case on their own. These cases cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I used to do Microsoft or GE, I mean, their litigation budgets were like over $1 million. They didn't even care about it. For the average seller, that's impossible. So that's the reason why this has to be done collectively, and should be done collectively. So, really tell your gurus, if you belong to one, tell your podcasters, tell everybody, come on, let's raise awareness for the organization
or tell them that they come off as somebody who's only interested in themselves and not in the members' health and the health of their business. If they're 100% unwilling to talk about these subjects because they're not knowledgeable about them, or they're touchy subject, I mean, that's not really a good enough excuse for somebody who claims to be a thought leader.
No, yeah. If you're a guru or a thought leader that's deleting posts about online merchant guild, which happens all the time, people post things that we say, they post things that I write, and the leading podcast guy or whoever, the leading web group just goes and deletes them, doesn't even want to just research it or anything. Then they're not doing you any good. They're doing you a disservice. And it's really telling, whose interest they're looking after. People who say they're too scared to talk about tax because it's, it could be a liability for them. It's not true. You're not taking sides on having a tax discussion on your website any more than CNBC discusses a stock, has an analyst on discussing the stock. It's no different. You're not subjecting yourself to liability. And in fact, I often tell those people that they often will bring on a tax service provider and say, this is the conservative approach, and that's what we endorse. You're not conservative. You send somebody into a situation where they're going to have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and basically they can't, so they lose their business. You pretty much screwed that person pretty badly. So I encourage anyone to get the message out to their leaders and say, listen, if you're really here to be a thought leader and help me, you need to get involved in this issue. You need to help raise awareness. If you're just here to help yourself and pretend,
that's it, right?
Yeah.
Then, maybe if there's no money in it, they don't want to talk about it. Maybe if it's something that they don't know, they don't want to admit that they don't know anything about it. And even though it's important to sellers, they haven't spent any of their free time reading up on it.
Right.
It's hiding.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that it's so myopic because they don't see that there is money in it. The money is, do you want to keep the money coming? I mean, do you want to continue to have members? Do you want to have customers? Do you want to have people to subscribe to you? Well, guess what? Like I said earlier, you're not going to be that relevant when most of your audience can't afford to be on Amazon or any of these other platforms because you didn't help us take the appropriate steps to fight back. The logic is sound, the legal is sound, everything's sound. It just needs, it's just about, raising the money to fight the fight. That's really what this is all about. And so we get everybody on board and aligned. It's just gonna, we can talk about legal theory all day long. It's not gonna help.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you so much, Paul. We're going to post the links with this video for you to contact Paul, how to contact the Online Merchant Guild, how to contact us. But please do share this information. Just share this video if you would like.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We have been doing this for months. Paul has been doing this for years.
You guys were you guys were the ones that brought me into this. So it's only fitting that we have this conversation almost a year later when we first started.
We're not the only two people interested in this. There's a reason why every time this topic comes up, I get lots of, contact from the press and people want to write stories on it. Obviously the public's interested. The information has to be presented and understood a certain way. That's all.
Exactly. And so, people who really understand this stuff should be the ones speaking about it. And, I'd like to say that if I'm teaching a law class and I've been litigating these cases for GE and Microsoft and Walmart, I probably know a thing or two about it. I'd like to say that. I don't know.
You can say that, and you just did. So.
Yeah, I try to be modest in life, but on this issue, I think I gotta be able to give myself a little bit of props here.
All right.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.